in the frozen depths of Siberia, in a facility that doesn't exist on any map. Soviet scientists conducted an experiment so disturbing that the details remained buried in classified archives for nearly 70 years. They took a young woman, strapped her to a metal table, and systematically froze her body to temperatures that should have killed her. But death wasn't the goal. Death would have been mercy. What they wanted was something far more ambitious and infinitely more cruel. They wanted to bring her back. Again and again and again. This isn't the story of a single experiment gone wrong. This is the story of how one woman became the unwilling pioneer of a technology that still influences medicine and space exploration today, and how the torture she endured was justified by men who believed they were conquering death itself. The woman's name was Anna Koslova, and between the years of 1953 and 1961, she would die and be reborn 17 times. Her story begins not with her own choices, but with the obsessions of the most powerful man in the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin was 70 years old, and he could feel time stealing away everything he had built, while the rest of the world was rebuilding after the devastation of the Second World War. Stalin was funding something that historians would later call Project Winter. The goal was simple to state and impossible to achieve: to freeze human beings in a state between life and death, preserving them indefinitely until they could be revived without damage or decay. Stalin wasn't interested in medical breakthroughs for the sake of humanity. He wanted to freeze time itself to create an army that could sleep through winter and wake for spring campaigns, to preserve scientists and engineers for decades without aging, and perhaps most importantly to find a way to extend his own grip on power beyond the limits of human mortality. Deep in the Siberian wilderness, in a concrete bunker surrounded by permafrost and silence, doctors and scientists began their work. They needed test subjects who wouldn't be missed. People whose disappearance would raise no questions and prompt no investigations. The criteria were coldly specific: women between 18 and 30 years old, prisoners serving long sentences, and most critically, individuals with no living family members who might come looking for them. The scientists referred to their subjects with a term that sounds almost romantic until you understand its true meaning. They called them ice maidens. 3 women were initially selected from the prison system, told they were volunteering for a medical program that would reduce their sentences and serve the advancement of Soviet science. Some of them actually thanked their captors for the opportunity. Imagine being young and trapped behind bars with nothing but years of emptiness ahead of you. When someone in authority tells you there's a way out, a way to be useful and earn your freedom, hope becomes a kind of madness. You'll believe anything. 2 of the 3 women died during their first freezing cycle. Their bodies simply couldn't withstand the trauma of what was being done to them. But Anna Koslova survived, and that survival would trap her in a nightmare that would last 8 years. What the scientists discovered about Anna during those early experiments defied every understanding of human biology. She didn't just endure the process, she seemed to adapt to it in ways that both fascinated and terrified her captors. And the reason why would remain hidden until the final days of Project Winter, when the truth about Anna's identity would surface and explain everything. If you're still watching this, you're the kind of person who doesn't look away from history's darkest chapters. Subscribe now, because the stories I tell here don't just shock, they reveal truths about human nature that textbooks would rather forget. And trust me, what comes next in Anna's story will change how you think about the price of scientific progress forever. Because the freezing process itself was designed not for speed, but for maximum data collection. And Anna remained conscious for hours as her body temperature dropped degree by terrible degree. The procedure took exactly 72 hours from start to finish, and the scientists used no anesthesia. They needed Anna awake for as long as possible to monitor her responses and record her physiological reactions. In the first 6 hours, as her core temperature dropped from normal human levels down toward the threshold of hypothermia, Anna experienced violent shivering that the restraints could barely contain. Her muscles would spasm and contract as her body fought desperately against what was being done to it. Her speech became slurred and confused as the cold invaded her brain. At a certain point, her consciousness would begin to fade, slipping away like water through fingers. But even then, the process was far from over. The scientists had developed a chemical compound they referred to only as Mixture Zero, a combination of antifreeze agents and blood thinners designed to prevent ice crystals from forming inside her organs and tearing her cells apart from within. The formula remains classified even today, locked away in archives that few researchers have ever been permitted to access. As the hours passed and Anna's body temperature continued its controlled descent, her heart rate would slow dramatically. Her breathing became shallow and irregular. Her skin took on a color that witnesses described as somewhere between gray and translucent, as if she were transforming into something made of ice and shadow rather than flesh and blood. At the 24-hour mark, her body temperature had dropped low enough that her metabolism slowed to a crawl. Her heartbeat became so faint that it required specialized equipment to detect. Her brain activity diminished to levels that in any normal circumstance would indicate permanent damage or death. But she was still alive, technically, suspended in a state that had no name in medical literature, somewhere between existence and oblivion. The final 48 hours were the most delicate phase of the entire procedure. Technicians monitored dozens of instruments around the clock, making microscopic adjustments to chemical concentrations and temperature controls. If the process moved too quickly, shock would kill her. If it moved too slowly, irreversible brain damage would occur. When Anna's core temperature finally stabilized at just a few degrees above the freezing point of water, her breathing had stopped entirely, sustained only by mechanical assistance. For all practical purposes and by any reasonable medical definition, she was no longer alive. And yet the machines insisted that somewhere deep inside that frozen shell, something essential remained. The Soviets had created a human being in a state that shouldn't exist, and now came the even more dangerous part, bringing her back. The revival process was, if anything, more brutal than the freezing. Anna would wake up screaming every single time, clawing her way back to consciousness like someone drowning who suddenly breaks the surface of dark water. But here's what none of the scientists anticipated. With each cycle, Anna didn't weaken, she grew stronger. Her bone density increased, her reflexes became faster, her mental clarity sharpened. It was as if the repeated journeys to the edge of death and back were somehow enhancing her rather than destroying her. By her 10th cycle, Anna had become an active participant in her own experimentation, suggesting improvements to the procedure and anticipating problems before the scientists themselves recognized them. And during her 15th revival, something impossible happened. She began speaking while her brain activity was still minimal, describing experiences from inside the frozen state that suggested she had remained conscious throughout, trapped in a silent darkness for weeks at a time. But the most disturbing revelation came from documents that only surfaced decades after Project Winter was terminated. Anna Koslova wasn't a random prisoner at all. She was Anna Jugashvili, granddaughter of Joseph Stalin himself, daughter of his eldest son who had died in enemy captivity during the war. Stalin had chosen his own bloodline to test because he suspected that genetic traits in his family might make survival possible. Anna wasn't a test subject. She was a prototype for Stalin's own planned preservation. When Stalin died in 1953, just months after the experiments began, Anna became a dangerous liability. She knew too much, she had become too powerful. The new Soviet leadership ordered Project Winter shut down and Anna executed, but she escaped, living under assumed names until her death in 1987 at age 50. Hospital staff reported something impossible. Even in death, her body temperature never rose to normal levels. She remained partially frozen until the very end. The techniques developed on Anna's body didn't die with her. They were acquired by space agencies for long-duration space travel research. They influenced every modern cryogenic preservation technique. Every person who signs up to be frozen after death is following protocols refined through Anna's suffering. She endured 17 deaths so that future generations could dream of cheating mortality. The question that haunts me isn't whether these experiments were justified by their results. The question is whether we have the right to benefit from knowledge purchased with such terrible coin. Anna Koslova's nightmare became humanity's hope for the stars. Her torture became our path to the future. Every medical advance built on her pain asks us to weigh the value of one person's suffering against the potential salvation of millions. It's a calculation that has no good answer. What would you sacrifice for the chance to live forever? What would you allow others to sacrifice for you? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because this question isn't just about history. It's about who we are and what we're willing to become.